The core strength that I had, the confidence that I developed, my ability to enter unfamiliar environments and to be prepared to do my best and hopefully excel, really came from my parents and all that I was taught in my childhood and growing up, and it came frankly from their experiences. So my mom was this, vanguard herself, an African-American woman in environments where she was not expected to be, much less thrive or succeed. And so she was an incredibly powerful role model for me, a working mother at a time when many of my peers' mothers didn't work, and who wasn't afraid to be a pioneer. My dad came from a very different background. He was the descendant of slaves, born in South Carolina in 1920. His background was fascinating. He was third generation college educated. My great-grandfather, who had been a slave in South Carolina, he fought in the Union Army during the Civil War. And then after the war, an officer who had supervised him, a white officer from Massachusetts, invited him up to Massachusetts to get a basic education, to get primary education. He went back to South Carolina, began teaching school. This is during Reconstruction. And then got driven out of South Carolina by the Ku Klux Klan. And he fled to New Jersey. And he got his college degree, a divinity degree at Lincoln University, years after having been enslaved. And then he went on, my great-grandfather went on to found a school in New Jersey called the Bordentown School. It was founded in the late 1880s, and it endured until the mid-1950s. And it educated generations of African Americans in not only vocational and technical skills, but also college preparatory skills. And so Albert Einstein and Mary McLeod Bethune and Eleanor Roosevelt, they all visited this campus. And it was a really important educational institution. So along comes my dad 2 generations later. The expectation was he was supposed to go into the ministry or something like that. He had no interest in that. He ended up getting his BA in New York City, at City College of New York in economics, and then got an MBA. But then he was drafted into World War II. And that turned out to be an incredibly formative experience for him. He served at Tuskegee with the Tuskegee Airmen. And rather than viewing that experience as some great opportunity to be part of proving that African Americans could fly and fight as well as anybody else, he really deeply resented the notion that African Americans had to prove anything to white America, and deeply resented the idea of fighting in a segregated military for the freedom of everybody but his own people. He was a proud American, he was a patriot, and he was proud to serve, but he was painfully aware of the dichotomy and the irony of that experience, and profoundly offended by the racism that he endured. He ended up leaving Tuskegee. He went to the University of California at Berkeley, became a PhD in economics. He was a professor at Cornell for many years, and then worked in the Treasury Department and the World Bank, and ultimately became a governor of the Federal Reserve. His big struggle was to figure out how to fulfill his potential, how to become what he knew he could be in a society that was telling him at every turn he couldn't. He couldn't get a job on the West Coast in academia. He couldn't get a job in the private sector. He got his first job out of graduate school at Cornell because they didn't know he was black until he showed up. One of the most important things he taught us was to believe in ourselves and to recognize that we were going to encounter racism, we were going to encounter bigotry, and all those things were extremely real barriers. And he taught us that bigotry, to a great extent, a function of the bigot's own insecurity. And so, as the recipient of that bigotry, you have a choice. You can either let the other person's definition of you become your own, or you can sort of develop the muscles to perform a sort of psychological jujitsu and push that insecurity back on them and understand your own self-worth, not to let anybody else define you for you. And the other thing he understood as he got older and he taught us was a view that summarized his perspective on race. And that was, if my being black is going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem for somebody else, not for me. Today we confront a profoundly connected set of crises: a relentless pandemic, a struggling economy, urgent demands for racial equity and justice, a climate in need of healing, a democracy in need of repair, and a world in need of renewed American leadership. In the 21st century, our foreign, economic, and domestic imperatives are deeply intertwined. Tackling these challenges is personal to me. I'm a descendant of immigrants and the enslaved, and service is in our blood. Fast forward to when I'm a young African-American female Assistant Secretary of State, breastfeeding a child, and I arguably don't belong, at least not yet, at least not then. And I was very aware of other people's perceptions of me. But I realized I had two choices: either to let them define me for me, in other words, to believe that I didn't belong and to act like I didn't belong, or to say to hell with it. I'm capable, I'm qualified, I might be young, I might make mistakes, but I can do this job and I do belong.